Okay, FHX repair. First step before we do anything, try and ascertain the condition of the handle. Is the inner tube bent? If so, you will see a wear mark on the tube, and you can then bend it back to its original position. This colour inner tube doesn't bend though, it's really quite strong. This one has a grip that is flopping around, which means the brake washer is broken. Have a look at the head. We've got a lot of movement of the cam, and there's quite a bit of wear in the head itself. To disassemble, take a pin punch, drive out the spring pin, remove the lever and pin, line up the position hole with the hole in the 025, and then scribe a line at 15mm and 60mm. Slide it in so the end of the 025 aligns with that first mark. Drill out the rivet. Drill out the second rivet. Remove the screw from the cam. Sometimes the 025 is a little bit tight. You can give it a small tap. Slide the 025 off and remove the inner tube. Remove the strap screw. And the brake housing retaining screw. Slide out the inner rod. Okay, and we can inspect the components. The rod never needs to be replaced unless it's sustained some sort of damage. It does need to be cleaned, however. Okay, all those components look okay. Disassemble the brake housing, and we can see that this brake washer has worn through and then snapped. And you can see that it's had quite a bit of wear anyway. The spring never needs to be replaced. Just needs to be cleaned. You can give it a little bit of a stretch, probably about 45mm long. We'll be replacing the brake washer. We'll be replacing the 036 screw pin. The strap is okay, so this needs to be cleaned. If this hole is elongated more than about 1mm, you'll get too much play, and it will need to be replaced as well, but this one's okay. This brake housing just needs to be cleaned. Do check that it hasn't cracked. It can crack in that thin section, but this one's okay. So the inner tube does wear. Have a look at how much wear there is in each of the position holes, if they are elongated too far, so that it results in probably, say, 2.5 to 3 millimeters of movement. Then replace the 025. So you can check that with the pin in a position hole. That shouldn't be, certainly not more than 3 millimeters. Check play in the grip. This needs to be tightened. And you can apply a little bit of lubricant around that pinhole. Always watch that there's not excess lubricant on the handle. Okay, clean, refurbish the handle strap. We use Worth brake cleaner. I recommend you get some sort of evaporating brake cleaner. Just give this a clean. Remove rust and residue from the end of the strap. Okay, and process wise, we'll do the brake washer and pin first to allow the Loctite time to dry. Put some Loctite primer on the brake washer and pin. We're going to use some Loctite 638. Some on the brake washer. There is a tapered lead in on the pin, so position that and then slide it through. Sometimes that's a press fit, sometimes it isn't. It needs to be Loctited either way. Don't put too much pressure on the brake washer, so get that done and then sit this in a position where it will not move. Okay, next step, the rod. The rod is very important that we get this right. It has a large impact on the function of the handle. So anytime this comes in for repair, I move the stop 180 degrees. So that presents a new side for the brake washer, or a new position at least. So using a clean rag, not one that's got any sort of lubricant on it, wash it with brake clean. You want to make the rod bare as possible. So once it's clean, don't touch it with your hands or avoid contact with your hands. So clean with brake clean. Put it in a pistol drill. Take some coarse emery paper, so something around 40 to 60 grit, and run it up and down. It should be hot on your fingers. Okay, next component brake housing assembly. I'm just going to clean all that residue off with a wire brush. And in here where the brake washer moves, sometimes you'll get some contact and a wear mark in there from the pin. So if you just file a very small flat, about 1mm, on those pins, it just ensures that there's no contact. Same with the rest of the components. Just remove any plaster. Tend to not clean inside here because we don't want a lot of clearance. That can promote this pin getting into a position where it's not engaged properly and then it sticks. So we want that to have some sort of contact there. The 025, just remove any excess plaster from the front, both sides. And then in here we tend to get embedded plaster, so scrape some of that out. And then you can use some lubricant on that, just wipe it on with a rag. The inner tube, just remove any residue from the end. Again, just lightly with a wire brush, any plaster from that channel. The end of the grip. Now with that grip, I mentioned before tightening this, we do need to make sure that there is not too much longitudinal movement of the grip. Again, all these elements add up to free play in the grip height and in actuating the cam. So there's a limit. We probably don't want any more than this handle has. This handle has some. Any more than that, remove the pin, replace the grip. Clean the spring. The brake washer, once that Loctite is set, we want to make sure that the pin is not sitting proud of the end of the sides of the washer. So if it is, we'll just dress that off. You need a silicon carbide or carborundum type wheel. Ensure you're wearing safety glasses. Okay, reassembly of the inner tube. Take the brake housing. Reassemble the brake washer assembly. Position the spring so that the last coil is about midway. Makes it sit well. Make sure it is sitting so that the brake washer can pivot freely and can move. Slide that back into the inner rod. Position the strap in the grip. Use a pair of lock-jaw pliers to secure the inner strap. Line up the hole. Reattach the screw. Use a little bit of Loctite 243 on the retaining screw. And check the end of the rod. Just look down along it and see if this is bent in any direction. If anything, it needs to bend towards the top. So keep that in mind. This hole needs to be aligned with the hole in the cam. So if need be, you can put a small bend in the end of the rod, like so. So disassembly of the head. Quite often all we need to do is adjust the free play out of the cam by moving the retainer forward. But in this case we want to adjust the wear in the head and maybe even put a small crease in it. If it is too worn, if it's a two-piece head, you can replace this FH18. Single piece head, it is quite cost effective to reform it, which I will show you. So first up, remove the lock screw. Remove the retainer. Okay, use a scriber or something similar to remove plaster from the grub screws. Remove the grub screws. Using a larger diameter pin punch, drive out the pin. Okay, so we want to adjust this gap to get it down so that it is a light press fit or a light drag onto the pin. So clean the pin. If it's had lubricant on it, use brake clean to remove the lubricant. If you've got a wire wheel, give it a buff on the wire wheel, make this nice and bare and clean. Give the head a quick clean. In the contact areas, remove any plaster. Okay, and you can see here how we have slots to retain the retainer, secure the retainer. And we can use that to adjust out any free play in the cam. So if there's only a small amount of wear in the head, you can adjust this down. You may be able to do it by hand, just by squeezing it. You may need to apply a little bit more force. You want to get it so that light pressure with your thumb will pinch that pin. Now this one is going to benefit from being reformed, so we'll do that next. If you have a small press like this one, you can reform the head by fitting the pin, fit a spacer under the tail of the hinge, and what we're going to do is put a small crease just behind the pin. So position a piece of steel, we're using an Allen key. Bring it down till it touches, make any minor adjustments, get it so it's parallel, and apply some pressure. Okay, so what we've done is put a small crease. We'll now adjust that down so that we get thumb pressure. So we now have it so that light thumb pressure will grip the pin, and you can see that this is parallel or slightly above parallel, so that will give us good grip height. We can now reassemble. Line up the flats, use some Loctite 243 on the grub screws. So if you can't, if you don't have access to a press, you can just replace that component, the FH18, on a two-piece head, or you can place the whole head. It is a little bit harder to replace the whole head. You have to heat this section to break the Loctite, and then remove the head and replace it and Loctite it back on. Again, use Loctite 638. Okay, make them firm. If this is a hollow pin off a super light handle, then just be aware of how much force you put on them. Do not make them out of round. So roughly 4 Newton meters is enough. So clean the cam and retainer with a wire brush, focusing on the contact surfaces. They're anodized so they will last longer. Loctite on the securing screws. So when you're tightening this, rest it so that it's pivoting on the pin. Don't put all the force on here because you can bend it. So just hold the retainer forward to reduce play in the cam. Right, so we just want it so that a small amount of movement of the cam will operate the brake. Tighten that up, make sure it is snug. You can do minor adjustments by using the lock screw to hold the FH18 tighter and then adjust your retainer. So that's another method that you can use. It does give you some preload on the head. So there we are, we've got a small amount of movement of the cam is operating the head, so that's going to give it a good length of life again. Remove any plaster from the end of the tube. Reposition the inner tube. Before we do that, if the handle has been lubricated with WD-40, just hose out the inner tube, or rather the inside of the outer tube, with brake clean, and likewise the inner tube. Try and remove all residue. Slide the inner tube in, and we need to make sure that the hole in the rod aligns with the hole in the cam. Sometimes this blade can be bent. You can straighten that by positioning it in a vise like so. In this case, this does line up nice. Refit the screw. No need for Loctite on that. It'll just make it harder to remove if you need to at a later date. Slide the 025 on, and then before we do anything, check operation and see what the grip action is like. You should be able to get a good braking action at this stage. If not, you need to investigate why not. Okay, reposition the 025 and line it up with the holes. If need be, if it's tight, you can give it a small tap from the back to line up the holes. Okay, now we're going to rivet it back in position, so we're going to use those 2 marks. So line up that first mark with the edge, and we need to use a standoff with our rivet, because if the rivet is in here, the head of the rivet gun can't get in far enough. So we use a small nut on the rivet. to give us that bit of extra reach. 3.2mm aluminium dome head rivets. Line up the other mark. If in the process of doing that you've caused any sort of burr inside here, you can just lightly use a file and just make sure that the lever is going to operate freely. Okay, clean this spring, give it a little stretch. If it's damaged, replace it. That sits in that locating hole. And then rotate the handle over so it's supported. Line up the spring pin and tap it in and test operation. So we should have good grip height.